All right, hello out there. This is Mike McCormick, and welcome to the channel. We're doing something we haven't done before. I actually have a guest who's going to speak with me regarding the classic 1976 King Kong, often misunderstood classic, I should say. And so I've got Adam Long here. Adam, how are you doing?
Doing well, Mike. Appreciate you having me on. I am a co-host of Movie Geeks United. For anybody who's listened to our show, we've been around a long time, and you composed our music. That's how we got together. And
that's right. That's right.
You did our theme music and did a fine job, I might say. Yeah, I am probably one of the biggest fans of this film. It was a life-defining experience for me, and we can get into that later. But
awesome.
Anyway.
Well, great. Yes, and in case you're a first-time listener, this is I'm Mike McCormick. I've done a lot of film composition for some small films, documentaries. Probably the most popular being the Shark is Still Working, which is on the Jaws Blu-ray and 4K. And so anyway, I am naturally a movie fan, and the movies that I grew up with inspired me to be creative. And why don't you tell everybody your first exposure to the 1976 King Kong?
That's a good question. I always enjoy telling the story. Well,
right.
Yeah, I'm in the Charlotte, North Carolina area. I was raised in a small town about 45 minutes away in the western part of North Carolina. Now I currently reside in Charlotte, but at the time I grew up in a small town about 45 minutes west. And being in a small town, movie theaters in small towns at that time, they didn't get films on the day and date. These films weren't released nationally at the same time. So we were seeing these ads on television in December of 76. I kept seeing them all over the place. But the film was not coming to our small town and didn't get here until February of 1977. So it was first week in February of 1977. I know for a fact because I went back and found the original newspaper from my hometown newspaper with the ads. And
those incredible ads.
Yeah, they were. And it actually has it's like I said, with the small town walk-in theater that we had downtown. And I was 6 at the time. I was in the second grade. The first grade. I was in the first grade. And basically with all the previews, I was a very excitable child, I guess you would say. And I had seen The Towering Inferno in early 1975. My father had decided to take myself and my mother. The three of us went and saw The Towering Inferno. I was 4 years old at the time. I still don't know what he was thinking, taking a 4-year-old to see this film that has all kinds of deaths, celebrity deaths, people falling out of elevators and stuff, but I'm surely glad he did. It was a wonderful experience, and the irony here is that The Towering Inferno was directed by John Guillermin, who directed King Kong. I didn't realize the connection time, but right. Towering Inferno sent me on this. It ignited, for lack of excuse the pun, I should say, for lack of a better word, ignited my passion for film. And I became a huge fan of movies. And so I was very excitable at the notion of trailers for films that really, I just really saw these King Kong trailers, and I couldn't wait to see what this was all about. And so I guess I just wouldn't shut up as a kid. And my mother basically said, okay, well, I'll take him. My dad wasn't really interested, I don't think, in seeing the King Kong remake for some reason. But my mother took me, and we went on a very cold February night in 1977. There was this was during the energy crisis, and
right.
A lot of businesses at this time were actually lowering the temperatures in their stores. You can go in the newspapers and see that they were keeping their temperatures down to, in some cases, the 60s in their businesses. So I just remember this being a very, very cold night, and we went, and it was a life-changing experience. It was just amazing, this film. I was just entranced by it the entire time, and we left, after the thing was over, and I couldn't stop talking about it. And just an amazing, life-changing experience for me. So that was my first experience with King Kong in February of 1977, and I actually, prior to seeing the film, my parents had already purchased the Bruce Barenberg book. He was the unit publicist for the film, and he had written a book called The Creation of King Kong, which tells you the behind-the-scenes efforts to get the film made. And it was a trade paperback from Pocket Books, I believe. And so
it's kind of like the Jaws log for
very
King
similar.
Kong.
Yes.
King Kong kind of parallels in a lot of ways the way they marketed it. In a lot of ways, Dino De Laurentiis wanted to parallel Jaws' success with King Kong. And in fact, from what I understand, Jaws' success inspired Dino De Laurentiis to make King Kong really at the start. Is that your understanding?
Yeah, that's true. That's true. It was a 1-2 punch, I believe. There was the thing. Jaws was obviously a part of the culture, but disaster movies were also a part of the culture at the time. True. And I think the edict in Hollywood was, they were seeing the box office receipts from Airport 75 and The Towering Inferno, both of those released in the fall of 1974. And that was 72. Around Christmas of 72, that had been. So those three movies, and The Hindenburg was in late 75, I believe, as well. So, all of those movies had done either good to very good. And so Hollywood always, they always like to imitate. It's hard to get them to do something original. You have to pull teeth to get that done. And so usually what they want to do is just imitate past successes, because that's the easiest way to recoup.
Kind of like superhero movies these days,
But yeah, it just over and over and over again. So the disaster movie trend was a thing, but they'd gone through all the disasters. They had done every disaster you could possibly imagine. So what could we do? Well, how about King Kong? Let's resurrect King Kong, and we can see him tear up some stuff. And so that was, Universal first came up with that idea, I think, and then. Mm-hmm. Dino De Laurentiis claims, depending on which story he tells, it's either but the story that he most often told was that his daughter had a King Kong poster in the room, and that's what led him to come up with the idea. But anyway, there was the big competition between Universal and Paramount, or Dino De Laurentiis rather, about who was going to get the King Kong film made first. And
right, the Legend of King Kong, is that what it was going to be called?
That's the Universal version.
The Universal.
Yeah, that was written by Bo Goldman, who had previously, the year before, adapted One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And so, that script is out there. You can find it in those places where you go. I think archives.org might have a copy of it. I have one, and it's quite an interesting read. It's set in that period of the 1930s, which makes it totally different from the one that we know and love, the Lorenzo Semple said in the pinned script that became the 1976 King Kong, which takes place in during the oil crisis.
The Universal script, I think I looked at it at some point. It kind of parallels it's more like the Peter Jackson version, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, it is. It is very similar in a lot of ways. It's pretty straightforward King Kong story, but it's a little different. It has some differences. He is some. It would have been interesting if they had made that. There actually was talk that they were going to make it around 78, 79, something like that. They were going to give Dino De Laurentiis' version time to breathe, and then once it was gone and done, then they were going to do the Bo Goldman version. But it just never happened. But Universal did eventually do their own, as you mentioned, with the Peter Jackson. So they eventually got there. It just took them a while. It took them about 29 years.
I think there was like a lawsuit throughout the latter part of 75, or a lot of legal wrangling, and I think eventually in January 76, Dino De Laurentiis went ahead and just started filming.
That's right.
Which started filming scenes, I think it was in Sri Lanka, at the boats at port and about to take to the ocean. And so by the end of that month, after he made that bold move, I think Universal ended up with a portion of distribution revenue, or they were distributing in certain markets. Or do you know anything about that?
I think there was some overseas distribution with Universal. I believe the rights are for the 76 King Kong are held by Studio Canal overseas. I know that. In America, they were retained by Paramount, which is interesting because there was a Studio Canal Blu-ray that's been out there for a long time before the Scream Factory Blu-ray, which came out last year, which was terrific, by the way, for anybody who has not picked that up. It sold out, and then they did a reprinting. I assume it's still available, but
it's still out there.
Yeah, that's great, because Ray Morton, whom I mentioned earlier, he contributed a terrific commentary on the Blu-ray set there, and there's also a commentary by Rick Baker.
Rick Baker, my understanding was he was brought on board. They were, of course, trying to do the Jaws model with the robotic shark.
That's right.
And then
hydraulic, yeah.
We had Carlo Rambaldi, famous for E.T. and Close Encounters, come in. So he built this giant, I don't know, what was the footage on it, like 20 feet tall.
It was 40, actually. It was about 40 feet tall, yeah. They and I think it cost $10 million or something like that. I think it's somewhere in that ballpark, and it's actually on screen for about, I don't know, maybe 30 seconds of footage, maybe 60 seconds if you're lucky, and it looks awful. It's the most glaring thing in the film. Of course, it didn't bother me as a kid. I didn't pick up on it, but looking at it now, it does not blend at all with the Rick Baker footage.
You know what, the thing about, everybody always gives that a hard time and pokes at it, but you know, the balls
right?
to make a 40-foot robot and think that you could film an entire movie around that. I love just the ingenuity, and I think that's a lot of what modern audiences take for granted, because everything's just, you know, CGI and it just lacks a realism. Whether or not you think the shark in Jaws looks real, in the movie it's an actual thing that's there, and it's something to be reckoned with, and that translates on film. And I think the same thing applies with King Kong. But whether or not it was successful, I love just the human ingenuity and hey, let's just go and build a 40-foot ape. That's the way we do it. Let's do that. So I just think that's so cool, and I think we take that for granted when we look back at a lot of older movies. I had someone told me one time when I was talking about Jaws, it was some young kid said, "Yeah, Jaws is cool, but the graphics aren't good." And I was like, "Oh my Lord, the graphics? There's not a graphic." Anyway,
well, you lose something. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, you lose something when actors are not interacting with real tangible things. You know, that's just something that's lost, and that's what's lost with today's films. You know, not to be the old man beating his chest and screaming at the air, but you know, I'll be honest. You know, there's just a sense of reality that's missing from these films, because the action set pieces are, with a lot of the CGI for these Marvel films and DC films, the action set pieces are filmed way in advance of the actual stories being concocted. You know, they basically shoot the action sequences and concoct the stories around them, you know, which wasn't the case with these films. And it just, I don't know, it just doesn't. I would rather see a Ray Harryhausen stop motion animation dinosaur interacting with people. That's more realistic to me than somebody standing in front of a green screen. And a little bit of the green screen is good if it's used in moderation, but when you do that for the entirety of your production, that's not particularly a good thing. And it's just, there's something that's been lost. But yeah, that's when people are interacting with real things. You know, in the case of King Kong, you know, there wasn't a 40-foot King Kong that was used for most of the film, but you did have Jessica Lange she was in a real hydraulic hand for a lot of the film, and so, you know, there was something tangible there for her to act with, and it does give you a feeling of realism. And we'll also say this before we move on to another subject. I think that the thing about Dino De Laurentiis having the chutzpah, I guess you would say, to build this 40-foot tall animatronic hydraulic King Kong. The funny part about this is it gave him some publicity that probably was that he got back every penny of his investment with the publicity, because when kids like myself at the time, we actually thought that, they're really using this is a 40-foot tall King Kong they've got in this film. This is a real robot. And after the film was over, we wanted to go wherever it was and see it and all this stuff. I know I believed all that. I bought into all of that when I was 6 years old, because I was a very gullible child. And it wasn't until later that I realized, hey, that was a man in a suit. That wasn't, but it really worked in terms of the generating publicity for the film, because people started talking about it, and so he got the may not be on screen very often, but it does, and it may stick out a little bit, but it did work in terms of getting people interested in the film.
He did. He got every penny back. And taking us back to we as children growing up with this movie and seeing the hype around it, a lot of the promotion was, hey, this has got a robotic Kong. This is a giant robot you're going to see. And the advertisements all said, this is the greatest, what was the tagline? The most exciting original motion picture
event
of all time.
Of all time, or is it of our time or of all time? I'm not sure, but I think it's one of those. Yeah. So
I think I don't know if we pulled that off very well, but still, it was fun.
We tried.
But that's that, and that was the tagline line on that beautiful poster, which is another thing that fascinates me, much like the Jaws poster.
Oh yeah.
The first thing that came out about this movie was a newspaper advertisement, I believe, around Christmas of 1975, and in newspapers across the country, there was
1 year ago today. 1 year from today, rather.
Yeah. And John Berkey, who did the posters and I think the Black Hole and some other stuff, but this massive ape swinging at airplanes and helicopters with a fuselage exploded in his hand, holding a beautiful woman, straddling the World Trade Center, which had just been built. And that poster, let's talk about that. What was your impression of that poster when you saw it? And still to this day, I have one hanging on my wall, actually.
I do too. I have one that an ex-girlfriend had specially ordered for me and put on a piece of wood, actually. So it's molded to a piece of wood. Yeah, it's very. She's gone, but the poster remains. So
that's right.
And when I see it, I do think of her. So I guess if that's what she was going for, it worked. But yeah, I had it was everywhere you looked. I mean, it was certainly something that was a definite part of our childhood, and it gave me a level of excitement every time I looked at it. It's like, whoa, there it is, and there were some variations that artist, I can't remember the guy's name. I'd have to go.
John Berkey.
Berkey, that's it. Very good. Yeah, he did some variations on it. You've probably seen them. There's one where he's.
I have the glasses.
Right.
I have the Burger Chef glasses. I still drink out of them. Whenever I make myself a nice alcoholic drink, I always make sure I use my King Kong glasses, as my guests also receive.
Very, very good. Them. I had the lunchbox. That's what I was going for. And so there are all these different variations on that art that were on the lunchbox. And so I carried that lunchbox with me for years, and all through my elementary school years. And I was so proud of that lunchbox.
That was great. King Kong kind of remained relevant through those years because, of course, it had its theatrical run. My understanding is it made worldwide in 1976 dollars $90 million, which these days would translate to somewhere over 300 million. And that's also not taking into effect the escalated ticket prices. So when you hear of a movie making 300 million, you're like, oh, well, that's not much compared to Thor. Well, the thing about it is each ticket for Thor is like $20. We're talking about $225 in 1976 for a ticket. So, and then you're factoring in the inflation just for the dollar itself, which right now is out of control. But anyway, this was a massive hit movie. I think it was the number 3 movie of the year.
It was
for 1976, and that's not even counting what it made in '77. And
that's right. Yep.
King Kong was like a massive hit. Now, the studio was disappointed it didn't surpass Jaws and it didn't meet some of the hype, but they made plenty a penny off of it. In fact, when it aired on TV, which is what I was trying to get at, you know, when you're still carrying that lunchbox around and it was showing on NBC, my understanding is NBC paid basically the budget for this movie just to be able to show it 2 or 3 times in the late 70s and early 80s. I believe there were 3 airings. And so just those TV showings, which led to us having that wonderful extended version of the movie, those 3 TV showings paid for the movie. So basically everything this movie made at the box office and residually through home video and cable TV airings was just, you're in the black. You're making tons of money off of it.
That's a good point. Yeah. And here's an important thing too, when you're talking about box office and why it didn't surpass Jaws, here's something to think about too. Jaws got a lot of reissues over the years. It was reissued over and over and over again in theaters after its initial run. King Kong did not have reissues. It basically was released, you know, at the tail end of 76, early 77. And by the end of the following year of 78, it was already on television. So it didn't have this long afterlife where it kept cropping up in theaters. There was I think a brief reissue where it was paired with Orca the Killer Whale, because I have an actual newspaper trade ad where it's paired up on a double feature with Orca the Killer Whale, which is another Dino De Laurentiis production, of course.
It's got you know how you were saying you saw Towering Inferno at 4? My mom and my aunt took me and my sister to see Orca in 1977, and I was like 3. And I remember seeing that as a little kid. Maybe that's what's wrong with me. I don't know. But terrifying. But that movie is actually kind of an underappreciated classic as well, and it does have great John Berkey art. That beautiful poster of the killer whale diving over the town with people throwing spears at it. It's pretty cool. And
that great Ennio Morricone score. That's up there with the greatest of Morricone's scores, in my opinion. That is a phenomenal score by Morricone. I'm a fan of the Orca the Killer Whale. Also, I saw that. I did not see that in the theater, unfortunately. Definitely wanted to, but didn't get my parents convinced to see that one. I saw that one on network television, and I think that was in 78 when that ran on network. Yeah, but I saw it, and I think I know it was a Saturday night. I can tell you that because my family and I had been out shopping, and I was worried that we weren't going to get home in time. And I remember my dad saying, "Oh, you're not going to miss anything but the credits. Don't worry about it." And we pretty much did. But I saw that. That was where my first encounter with Orca. But yeah, the thing to talk about with King Kong is, you know, it would have probably hit those Jaws numbers had it been reissued multiple times like Jaws, because they kept dipping into the well. Because Jaws did not make it to network television, I think, until 79. I want to say 70. Yeah, I was going to say, it was about, so it got a bunch of, it got a lot more reissues, like, you know, and that's what they did in the days that were pre-video, before Star Wars was reissued time and time again, and that's where some of the money came from that Star Wars likes to, you know, that the makers of Star Wars like to say, claim for their box office. Some of that was in reissues, and so
that was the great thing though about the you know, that about the 70s and 80s to a degree, is everyone was kind of tapped in on those movies of the week, because this was before we really had cable everywhere and home video. So like you would see, like I remember the Monday after one of these movies, King Kong or Orca or Jaws, and then the following Monday, all the kids at school would be like, "Hey, did you see that?" And everybody was just in a frenzy over seeing these movies. The ABC Sunday night movie. And you can, like, on YouTube, you can Google up all these cool old retro vintage introductions, and you can feel the hype, and like you sit there just excited as you could be, and you were tapped in with all these millions of other people across the country, and it was a unifying thing. It's something I so miss, and I feel like it's kind of like songs on the radio. Everybody's kind of in their own little world now. But back in these times, you know, everyone was watching and experiencing these things even in their homes together. And it made it more of a cultural thing, and King Kong really had that with those with those TV airings, and everybody was watching and hyped up. I believe they'd go over 2 nights. But you mentioned Ennio Morricone's score for Orca being one of the best scores, and I'm sure you'll agree. John Barry did a fantastic score for King Kong, and in fact, my understanding is he recorded this score unconventionally as it was being filmed. So he would get a reel at a time and score the movie as it was being filmed, and it was quite an arduous process. But what do you think of the score? I just love it.
Well, I have a history with the score as well. In the summer of '77, obviously, King Kong was still lingering on my mind. I couldn't stop talking about it. I basically became aware of soundtrack albums sometime in early '77. There was a fairly new mall in our area, and so there was a Camelot Music and a record bar, and so they had soundtrack albums. And my dad was a record collector anyway. That was his big hobby. And so I remember going, into the record shops with my father and seeing all these, the movie art for these films on these records. And I said, "What's this?" And my dad said, "Oh, this is, this is the music that you hear in the films. These are soundtrack albums." And so he explained that to me, and so I was, enamored with the thought that I could have the music from King Kong to play at any time. I said, "Oh, I can get this record, I can play the music." And so it would be my way of reliving the film, even though I didn't have a copy of the film to watch at home, but it was a way to certainly relive parts of the film by listening to the music. So that was my biggest request. I want the soundtrack. And so my birthday came around and I got it, summer of '77. And I literally played that album until it was unplayable. It had a poster. It had Jessica Lange in the hand with blue screen in the background. And it had the art on one side. On the other, I think it was the John Berkey art you were referring to. There was a poster of that on the other side of that. But anyway, that was, I know every cue of that soundtrack album by heart. I could hum it to you right now, just off the top of my head. But the thing is that for years, I noticed when I would see the film years later and I was able to pick up on those certain things, I thought to myself, there's music here that's missing from this album. What's going on with this? What's doing with this? And so I think it was Film Score Monthly. They issued the original, and it was on Reprise Records, the label that was owned by Frank Sinatra, which is a subsidiary of Warner Brothers. And I remember Film Score Monthly released it on CD in the early 2000s, maybe around 2005 or something like that. They put it out, and they could not get, they admitted that there was extra music, but they could not get their hands on it for contractual obligations, like the De Laurentiis Corporation wasn't going to license it or something of that nature. And so it was really sad to know there's music in the vaults that's not going to get issued, but whatever, we'll take this. And so I got I bought the CD release. Although after my album wore completely out, I went to a record convention and bought a new one that was still in the shrink wrap. So I had that one that I held on to as well. But then an amazing thing happened in 2012, I want to say it was, or maybe it was 2013. Film Score Monthly was able to actually license those the unissued music, and they issued the score in its entirety. And so if anybody is a fan of King Kong and you don't have the Film Score Monthly soundtrack, it may be out of print now. I can't remember, but
it's kind of hard to get a hold of. But it's if a collector's out there, most people obsessed with this movie probably already have it. But if you're new to this and you want to explore that, probably the best place to look would be eBay. But I don't think they're in circulation anymore. I think there were just 2,000 or 3,000 made.
But there's some cues on there that are not on the original album that are in the film prominently. It's so great. It was so great. It was so great to get that. When I did, I thought, I'm in heaven now. So it's
it's one of those things. kind of like getting the extended cut on the recent Blu-ray. It's kind of like just one of those holy grail items that once you get it, you never, take it for granted. It's cool.
Yeah.
And while we're talking about the score, I mean, obviously me as a composer, it was very influential on me.
Sure.
And when I introduced myself, I forgot to mention that, I did do the score for Long Live the King, which is it's a King Kong documentary that mainly focuses on the 33 and admiration for that, but of course they go through all the King Kong movies. You can see it on Amazon, and you can get it on Vudu. But the music in that is my compositions. You can hear the soundtrack as well. It's out and about on Amazon, and places like that, Spotify. But it was very influential as far as the music that I wrote. And in fact, there's one track I call Jessica. You can find a video on YouTube where we kind of did an animated video with an artist. Anyway, check it out. I tried to recreate John Barry's giant orchestra sound for that track, Jessica. So maybe check it out. But yes, I did do the score for Long Live the King. And when they got to the 76 movie, there was a lot of interviews. Greg Nicotero, who's awesome, did a section talking kind of about how cool the poster was and whatnot. But then everybody was digging at it. And I actually said to the producers, and they made some alterations. I said, there's a lot of people that like King Kong. I know this because Jim Avey, who I'm hoping to have on here as a guest, maybe doing a full-on commentary, and you're welcome to join us for that. But there's a Facebook group for the 1976 King Kong that's active, and people are on there all the time and posting old ads and old pictures they find and just talking about how they appreciate it. They actually made some trims to it, so I'm kind of happy about that. Like, whenever I see the documentary, I'm like, yes, it's a little more complimentary to the 76 movie than it was originally in that original cut. But it seems like maybe it's because of the World Trade Center, but I don't know, somewhere along the line, and I think in the 70s, people didn't look fondly upon sequels and remakes like they do now. These things were looked upon as cash grabs and greedy or something. So there was always kind of a stigma to sequels and remakes, and I think some of that happened with Kong. I also think, obviously, during its run, towards the end of its run, Star Wars came about, which I kind of look at King Kong as one of the last of the classically made, workmanlike Hollywood blockbusters. And then you have this new technological age come in with Star Wars, and King Kong kind of got left behind or forgotten about in some circles because of this new generation with the miniatures and although King Kong uses a lot of blue screen like Star Wars used blue screen, there was just a computer element that wasn't used with Kong that kind of took over and left the movie a little bit behind. What do you think about that? Do you feel like the movie's misunderstood or not quite as fondly remembered as when it was released, when people were lining around the block to see it? And from my understanding, most people enjoyed it.
It's certainly the thing that separates the 1976 King Kong, and it does not get enough credit for, in my opinion, is its humanity. The film has an element of humanity that is sorely missing from the 1933 film. And a lot of people like to dig on it because of its, dialogue, this Lorenzo Semple, quote-unquote, campy dialogue.
Oh, I'm so tired of the movie being called campy.
Right, that's what they call it. And, people like to hold the 1933 King Kong as this impenetrable, perfect film that doesn't have, and it is a great film. It's a great film. But the problem is that people overlook its issues as well, and there's a lot of slangy dialogue in the 1933 King Kong. Where there's a line or something where he says a guy falls for a dame and he turns into a sap or something like that. And there's all kinds of stuff like that in there. Let's
just say by modern standards, a lot of people these days could throw some arrows at the 33 King Kong, and that's not the 1933 King Kong's fault necessarily, because that's just the way it was at the time.
Right.
And we can't hold these things to modern day sensibilities. But I would say one thing about the 33 Kong, and it's an amazing movie. To me, that movie is like when the Wright brothers built an airplane. I mean, it's like, this is a monument of human evolution and ingenuity. It's up there. It's wonderful. But one thing that whenever I put King Kong on, the screaming. I mean, she screams so much, and I think that's one of the cool things about 76. Is there's actually, as you say, some heart and humanity to it that you don't really get with a lot of the other versions. Kind of a Beauty and the Beast motif, but truly in that tradition. What do you think about that?
Well, yeah, absolutely. I second that emotion to everything you say and have said. The thing that I think about the film that I really admire about the 1976 King Kong, and I think it really helped me to develop as a more sensitive human being, actually, in my formative time. I was 6 years old at the time, and so my feelings and emotions were, and the person I would later become was cementing itself. And so the sadness that you sense in this film for what they've done, from the moral responsibility that Jeff Bridges feels for having brought this giant ape ripped him from his habitat, and they put him in this urban jungle as opposed to a real jungle. And and they feel he feels a real responsibility for what's going on. And I felt that as a child, seeing this. I was like I said, these were my formative years forming who I would later become. And so I think seeing that, I felt the sadness when he dies at the end of the film. You don't get a sense of sadness in the 1933 King Kong. What you get is basically the attitude is, well, it's Beauty killed the Beast. It's like, well, we brought him over here. If the dumb ape hadn't climbed up on that building, it wouldn't have happened. He got what was coming to him. I mean, that's the attitude. There's nobody takes any responsibility for what they've done. Nobody stops for 2 seconds to say, you know what, we probably shouldn't have done that. We should have left him where he was at instead of chasing the almighty dollar. But, that's the difference between the 19th. Now, we do have the Charles Grodin character who is, represents the Carl Denham. He's the equivalent to the Carl Denham character in the original. And, he's chasing the dollar with, his pursuit of oil. And so he doesn't get the oil, but he finds a way to get what he loses by not getting the oil. So there's all of that, but you have a character who cares and is represented by, and Jessica Lange cares as well. She's torn between her career pursuits, but she also feels a moral responsibility as well, as evidenced in the final scene there with him. And so I remember just feeling incredibly saddened as a child, those final scenes where he's pummeled by the helicopters.
Yeah, that scene is so. I mean, they really destroy him up there. But the whole movie, and even like with the score, there's this thread of dread and doom for Kong, and you just really feel it. And then when it comes full circle, and he's laying there, on his deathbed. Until they put artificial heart in him, of course, but we won't get into that. But that scene though, man, and when that light dims in his eye, his heart slows down. And so many movies have ripped that off. That heartbeat, man, nobody had really seen anything like that in a movie. And then, but the way they took that light and just dimmed it ever so slightly as his heart slows, as he's looking at Jessica Lange. Wow. I mean, it just hits you emotionally. And I guess what we're trying to get at is, as great as the other King Kong movies are, and they are great, they have lots of great aspects. The end of the Peter Jackson King Kong, that finale, is amazing. But this Kong has an emotional center to it. It has a heart to it. And it really is taken for granted it's a disaster film, as you say, but it's also a tragedy. And John Gillerman should get some credit. He's not one of these celebrity directors that came about in the 70s. He was kind of a workman, but he did his job and he did it well, and crafted a movie that, at least to these two guys, has a legacy that will go on throughout our lives. And we know there's a lot of people out there that also enjoy it. So I hope anyone out there listening might share in this and enjoy talking about it. What do you think about John Gillerman? What do you think about his direction?
Well, I think he, I obviously, not knowing that he helmed The Towering Inferno, as I mentioned earlier, that was an effective film. I think Irwin Allen liked to take a lot of the credit because he's credited as director of action sequences, Irwin Allen. And
right.
But again, in The Towering Inferno, a lot of the human interactions, the character stuff with the Jennifer Jones character for one, and her relationship with Fred Astaire in the film, and there's several other characters in the film, but that's the one that most notably comes to mind. That's all Gillerman doing that stuff. And so then you have King Kong, 2 years later, and I think Irwin Allen on that earlier film, I think his contributions were a lot less than what he liked to give himself credit for. From what I've always heard, that was a sticking point with John Gillerman. But
just as we're talking about The Towering Inferno, when you look at it from a perspective of a director, imagine managing all of those different plot points, because that movie has like a long list of major actors that are in it for the time, and the way the movie just goes from one story to another subplot to another subplot to another subplot to the main subplot, you know what I mean? Like, to direct that and to hold that together, that really tells you that Gillerman was a great director, a great craftsman at putting these movies together. He certainly exhibited that with Kong as well, and he should get more credit for it.
I think so too, and I was able, when he passed, I never got to meet John Gillerman in person, unfortunately, or talk to him. I always wanted to, but he passed away, and I had his widow and I had a mutual friend on social media. So I sent a short but sweet, impassioned letter and a note of condolence to his widow, and she was very taken with what I had to say about his contributions to popular American culture, and she invited me to his memorial service, which I attended, and I was able to stand there. Topanga Canyon is where he lived, north of Los Angeles, and so I drove up on a Sunday night and flew in and drove up on a Sunday night to attend his memorial service, and it was kind of odd being this guy who was not technically in the entertainment business, but his work had meant so much to me as a child. And his widow asked me to basically get up and reiterate the story that I had put down in the letter. And so I did the best I could. And it was such a sweet affair. All the people said that were in attendance. They said, "We're going to make you an honorary Topangan." That's what they told me while I was there. But it was an opportunity for me to say what I had to say about Gillerman. Unfortunately, I didn't get to say it to him while he was among us, and I basically said, what you said, that he was, a good, able to bring out the human element in his work.
Mary,
yes, a very sweet lady. We are still friends to this day. Yeah,
I've seen her posting around. I think I've exchanged some things. I made kind of a King Kong video on my channel that kind of boasts the movie and celebrates it, and I sent it to her, and she replied and sent a message back to me. So she's very active. I think she even wrote a book.
She did, yes, about her husband. So, it's a series of essays, actually, about her husband's life, and basically she had a different person takes a chapter on a movie that he did in his career, and he made many of them. And Ray Morton, who wrote the King Kong book, that I don't know if we've referenced that or not, but I always like to get that out. The history King Kong, the history of a movie icon, from Fay Wray to Peter Jackson, by Ray Morton. He did also did the commentary on the Blu-ray, as we mentioned, and that book is fantastic. And he contributes an essay on the '76 King Kong in the book she did, and so it's good stuff. If anybody wants to know more about John Gilliman and his career. And he had some really interesting things prior to and after King Kong. He did Shaft in Africa. The third Shaft film was one of his credits, which people tend to forget. So
The Blue Max with George Peppard. That's a
right.
great
That's
aerial war movie. But yeah, so shout out to him and Mary Gullerman. Be sure and look up her book. I'm sure it's on Amazon.
It is.
And I'll try to find a link and I'll put it in the description on the video, as I will for Ray Morton's book and the Shout Factory King Kong and anything else I can think of. But that's great of Mary and her being active in her husband's memory, and that's a wonderful spouse. So I celebrate that, because not all of us have that.
Yeah, she has done a great job keeping his legacy alive, and he could be a volatile person at times. Of course, he had a lot of pressure on him when he was making these films. These were major Hollywood productions, and I think the pressure would get to him occasionally, and he would apologize, but he would have temper tantrums. He could have those moments. I know there's a moment in Ralph Winters, who was a legendary editor, and he did an autobiography before he passed away, recounting the stories of his career in Hollywood, and he was the editor on King Kong, and obviously Ralph Winters had a lot to deal with, trying to put the live action and the Rick Baker in the King Kong suit together convincingly in the film.
Right.
Ralph Winters had his hands full, but he recounts a story where they were in a screening room looking at some of the rushes, and basically Gillerman ripped one of the seats up that was bolted to the floor and threw it across the room when they were doing.
I've heard that story about him doing that, but what I heard was, maybe I'm wrong, but maybe he did it twice, but he was so excited because he was having trouble casting Dwan, that when he saw Jessica Lange's screen test, he got so excited he loosened the chair. He shook the chair in front of him so much that it came loose. Have you heard that?
I've heard that story. The Ralph Winters story is it was a fit of rage, that because he apologized later, is what Ralph Winters says, that he came in and apologized and said, that was wrong. I shouldn't have done that. I'm sorry. And he had a change of heart. He was just very mad, not pleased at all about what was going on with the production at that point. There's been some in the Bruce Berenberg book. He kind of I don't know. He doesn't really come right out and say it, but you get a sense that they had to get rid of some stuff because they were just running out of time. They were locked into a December of '76 release date, and that some stuff was kind of not shot that was originally in the script. I don't know how true that is. I'd spoken to Ray Morton, and he says that pretty much everything that was written was filmed. But I got a sense by reading the Bruce Berenberg book that maybe not everything was filmed there, because they were still shooting in September and they were locked into a December release date. And I don't think they had production until October, 1st of October. And that's an amazing turnaround to get that film. I think Barry's score, you were talking about that earlier, that was recorded in the summer of 1976. I think he recorded most of that in July of '76. So that's how far ahead of the game he was.
After the first reel, I believe, was completed, which was the movie was pretty much shot chronologically, from what I understand.
Right. Yeah, for the most part. Yeah.
He probably got that first reel around summer, because my understanding is it shot from January '76 through the end of September, around this time of 1976. And that's a long shoot. And think about frustrating. He's dealing with the practical special effects, like that wall, building that giant wall. What an achievement that is. Look at that set, that giant wall. People made that, and all those extras, and wrangling all these extras both in New York and for the sacrifice scene. That's a tremendous responsibility. And if you look at a lot of the sketches, the pre-production sketches, what's the term for it? It's failing me. Well, I'll tell you what. I'm gonna interrupt this real quick, and I had poured myself a shot of tequila before we started recording because this is my first one. I didn't know how it would go. I mean, I've chatted with people before, but not on my own channel and doing this. And I'm gonna do a shot. I had the shot in case a shot of tequila in my King Kong shot glass. I was gonna do this. I was gonna do this shot because I was nervous, but I'm not nervous because you're easy to talk to. I want to do a shot now. Dude. Let's do a shot now for everybody that worked on the 76 King Kong. And everybody out there listening, cheers. We're having a good time here. Here we go.
Right, here we go. Very good.
All right, let's get back to it. And thanks again for doing this, Adam. You've been great chatting with, and you've done such great work with Movie Geeks United. I really appreciate this.
Well, my honor, man. I appreciate you asking. It's funny because it's funny. I've just done Movie Geeks for so long, and then I had 2 requests last week for me to come on other people's shows, and yours is one of them. And another guy, the Culture Cast, he requested that Chris Stashew, who does a lot of work with Mike White over at Projection Booth, and he had asked me to come on his show, and because he thought that I would be a good guest. So I'm actually coming on there in early November to talk about Harry and Tonto, the Paul Mazursky film, which got Art Carney his only Oscar for Best Actor. So, so anyway.
So yeah, we'll have to do this again. If you have any movies that you're passionate about, you want to talk about, and again, anyone listening, I want to try to keep going with this and keep doing it if folks enjoy listening to it. If you have any comments, any movies that you feel are underappreciated, or something you'd like to hear discussed, we'll certainly look into it. I can't guarantee I'd be an expert on it, but maybe I can find someone who is. And or if you're listening, you might want to be a guest sometime. Feel free to leave me a message, subscribe, share these, and let's hopefully build something fun for us all. So back to 76 King Kong. I'm sorry we went on that tangent, but I believe you were talking about a lot of the technicians working behind the scenes, and we certainly want to celebrate them. So I'll let you pick back up there if we can.
Oh, I was just speaking of the production designers, Mario Chiari and Dale Hennessy. They were amazing with the look of the film. They created the look of the film. And I think people should speak of them more often. Dale Hennessy actually has an interesting history because he also designed the look of Woody Allen's Sleeper. That's a film where it takes place 100 years into the future. But Hennessy did not, unfortunately, he didn't live much, only 5 years after King Kong. He passed away, sadly, way before his time, I think. Yeah, 1926 is when he was born, so he wasn't that old. He was only 54. But he did some interesting films that should be talked about. We'll just mention him because he did. Sure. I think his last film that he worked on was Annie in 1982, and that's another great looking film in my opinion. That
was a big release back in the day. I remember that was. Yeah. I have a sister, and Annie. That was a big deal.
Yeah, he designed the look of Annie, and I think he died during its production. But some of the other films that Dale Hennessy did were everything you always want to know about sex. So he'd previously worked with Woody Allen on that one as well. And there's some interesting stuff there, including a giant boob, shall we say, that attacks Woody Allen in the film. So he was responsible for designing those sorts of things. Sleeper, as we mentioned. Young Frankenstein is Dale Hennessy designed the look of that film. Terrific.
Just about to watch that again. I love Young Frankenstein.
Good stuff. Logan's Run, and Michael Caine filmed The Island. So those are some things that Dale Hennessy was responsible for. So he was quite a talent, and like I said, probably one of the first. He was also an art director for The Fantastic Voyage from 1966.
Oh, yeah, Raquel Welch.
Yeah, and Battle for the Planet of the Apes as well. So he did, and the art director on the Dirty Harry. So he had an interesting career. Yeah. No, I was just going to say Sorry. No, I was just gonna say one of the first people from the behind the scenes talent to pass away. That's all I was gonna say.
I was going to say about Logan's Run. I saw a clip on YouTube from I think the Oscars posted it, and it's got Roy Scheider, my favorite actor. Roy Scheider comes out and in 1977, and he gives a special achievement for special effects to the technicians behind Logan's Run and King Kong. Do you remember seeing that, or have you seen that?
I don't think I have, actually.
Yeah, you got to look it up. I'll try to link that in the description as well, so you can pull that up. But of course, Richard Pryor introduces Scheider, and he calls him Roy Schneider. Anyway, so Roy comes out and he gives a special Oscars, and it's to the technicians that helped build the robot. And the folks behind Logan's Run. And I think that's one place where Rick Baker probably has, a thorn in his side, because he did obviously so much terrific work. And at the time, they were still pushing this thing about Rick Baker's performance being a robot. And even when I saw King Kong, I wasn't sure, is that a robot? Is that a robot? I mean, even with the obvious robot scenes, you're still thinking, and you see the hands so much, so you're thinking the whole thing's a robot. If he should get to hear this, I mean, we totally applaud what you did there, and it's something that I don't know. I know he's upset about how Kong had to walk upright, but I'm sure you'll agree. In the 70s, there was a thing about Bigfoot. Like, there are all these Bigfoot movies, documentaries. In Search of Bigfoot was on TV with Leonard Nimoy.
Had all from Black Lake. With,
that's right.
And Dub Taylor and
Dennis Fimple.
Dennis Fimple and Legend of Boggy Creek. Let's give a shout out to that one. So
that's right. That's right.
But anyway, go on. I'm sorry. Didn't mean to interrupt.
No, it's great. So Rick Baker was, I think he's held a grudge against King Kong because and I've been treated badly on certain projects I've worked on. And I'm sure he kind of looks at King Kong as one of those projects. He's like, what I hope he could get from this is that he did a great job. And the stuff he did with his eyes and those contacts, and just amazing stuff. And there was a second guy that I believe just passed away, and his name escapes me. I think it's Will Shepard.
That's correct. Absolutely.
Okay.
He wrote an autobiography, a memoir rather, of his time on spent on King Kong. You can read it. Yep,
I don't know if it's still in publishing, but I hope it is, because it gives a great insight behind the scenes. There's just so many things to talk about this movie, and we don't want to go on forever, but I guess kind of moving forward, let's talk about some of our favorite scenes from King Kong. What stands out the most to you? What do you, if you're going to pop on the DVD and put 3 scenes on, real quick, what would they be? What are your favorites?
Well, one of them would be, and this ties into what you were just talking about, Rick Baker and his talent, and that is the final sequence where he's, basically being shot at by the helicopters, and it's the mask that makes that so effective, because he built there a series of what I think 6 masks or something, each one of them controlled by hydraulics, that with different facial expressions, and it's the look of pain on his face that is in that mask that was used in that sequence.
Right.
Just, it's so sad, the sadness in his eyes. That is just such an effective scene, and again, a testament to Rick Baker's talent to craft. And by the way, for anybody who's interested in seeing the original mold that was used to create these face masks, it's in the Academy Museum of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences on Wilshire in Los Angeles. I saw it. It's there. You can see it. It's in the makeup section. That's
the new museum that just opened up in Los Angeles.
That's correct.
You know what else they have there is the Jaws mold.
They do.
That they salvaged from Greg Nicotero. Saved that and refurbished Jaws, so you can actually see one of the 25-foot castings of the mold of the shark that was in Jaws, and it looks great. I've got to go out and see that. So knowing that
it's great. But another scene that stands out for me would be the scene where King Kong is first revealed. An amazing sequence that was very effective for me as a child. When he's first seen and they reveal him, it's amazing the way that was shot, and his size is conveyed to be enormous on screen, and it was incredible. His entrance, it's and the way they do the over the shoulder shot as he's approaching, and the trees are falling, and so there's an air of mystery before you actually see his face. And so I remember as a child when seeing that, and it's like, oh my gosh, this is just, it was too much excitement, and then they, when he finally gets to Jessica Lange, and he scoops her up from the altar, and you get to see his how big he is. It's amazing.
Yeah, I love the I'm sorry, just talking about Rick Baker and his performance, and those shots where he's coming through the trees, and again, you're not sure at first, is this a robot? What is this? But the eyes. And when he's tearing through the trees, he's not just looking ahead or anything. The way his eyes are looking around, and it's almost like, Kong's looking up at the gate, at the people at the top with the torches, and he's just checking everything out, and he's just so aware. But just the way his eyes are kind of just looking around, it gets you connected right with him right away.
Yeah, conveying emotion. It's terrific. It really is. Probably the third, you said ask for 3 scenes, and I'll give you the third one right quick, and that would be the scene where where she's running away from him, and he scoops her up, and
the glade scene, I believe everybody
the glade
refers.
Scene, yeah, that's a sequence that has always been, it gets a little crap. People have talked about it, because of the dialogue. What sign are you? No, wait, I can tell you're an Aries by the shape of your ears or whatever. But
that's where the movie earns its campy.
It's true. But that's campy dialogue. But the thing I like about that scene is the way they blend the hydraulic hand with Rick Baker. It's seamless. It's really,
it really is
perfectly done. You truly believe that that hand and Rick Baker are one and the same. So that's the reason I like that. I admit that the dialogue's a little campy, but the way that's put together and edited, again, credit to Ralph Winters and his talents.
And Richard H. Klein, the cinematographer.
Richard H. Klein, yeah, he was amazing. He knew how to light that stuff effectively. And another person who had a long career with a lot of great credits, including Star Trek: The Motion Picture was one of his more notable films also. But I think his work on The Boston Strangler is some really groundbreaking work, if anybody out there has not seen that, because they use a multi-screen technique.
Richard H. Klein was kind of the guy to go to for that, and even later in his career, he was enlisted for Double Impact with Jean-Claude Van Damme, one of my favorite Van Damme movies, by the way.
Yeah.
But of course, that was needed because obviously there were 2 Van Dammes running around, and I got to say, the work on that is seamless, and in a lot of cases, I mean, certain scenes maybe there's some optimizing, but for the most part, I mean, you don't think twice about it. You watch that movie, you believe there are 2 Van Dammes, and that's a credit to Richard H. Klein. Same thing with King Kong, and one of the cool things that was in Will Shepard's book, and I think Rick Baker's discussed this, and I'm unclear if it's Will Shepard or Rick Baker. I think it was Rick Baker that was up when you talk about one of your favorite scenes being when the helicopters are attacking Kong. They had someone in a Kong suit, again, I believe it's Rick Baker, up on a platform, and when you're watching that movie, as the helicopters are coming, those are real Vietnam era helicopters flying and shooting blanks at one of the King Kong actors standing up on a platform, and they're doing they've set the camera up to where it looks like forced reality shot, I believe is what it's called.
Forced perspective, maybe.
Forced perspective. There you go. Thank you. It must be that shot of tequila I had. But anyway, that's a real shot of real helicopters firing and shooting at Air King Kong, and just what an awesome way to make a movie. And like nowadays they just, use a mouse and CG it. Not to discredit that work. It's great work. But this is hey, well, let's just build a platform, put a guy in a monkey suit up there and fly some helicopters around at him and shoot blanks. Not only is it dangerous, but it's ingenious and it's really effective in the movie. And credit to Rick Baker for climbing up there, or Will Shepard, or both of them for tolerating such situations. So yeah, I think. But real quick, and we'll get this wrapped up. But let's talk about the cast real quick. Any thoughts? Of course, we've got Charles Grodin, Jessica Lange, Jeff Bridges. We've got a great cast here. What do you think of the cast of King Kong?
I think it was very well chosen. I mean, Grodin does Slimy like no other.
Awesome.
And Jeff Bridges, he does the hippie thing quite well, as he would later on do even more so in The Big Lebowski. So
Jeff Bridges was considered for Hooper in Jaws,
mm-hmm.
and it's in a weird way, it's almost like he's making up for not getting that part. He's kind of like, I could see Jack Prescott and Matt Hooper hanging out,
Right, yeah, absolutely, yeah. So, I think, and of course, Jessica Lange, she does the best she can. A lot of people say that, her acting was terrible. It wasn't terrible. She's doing the best that she can with what she's been offered. And, she's playing the part. And, the script, was what it was. And so, there's
But it has to be said, Adam, she's so gorgeous in that movie. She is just.
Oh yeah.
She is stunning, and
of course, yeah, that's true. Yeah, it's definitely there's no doubt about that. She was easy on the eyes, as they say, and obviously the bad notices that she got for her acting in the film didn't hurt her any, because several years later she was up and running again in Bob Fosse's All That Jazz, and that led to some Oscar-winning couple of Oscar-winning turns. Tootsie.
Yeah, All That Jazz is so great. Roy Scheider again.
Yep, terrific film. Yep. So, and she's great as the Angel of Death. What a beautiful angel! We could all hope that when we reach that point, if we're visited by an angel of death, that it would be that kind of angel of death.
So true. But man, like that scene where she's like by a waterfall and she runs off. She's excited. Oh my gosh, that's just. I think Jessica Lange in King Kong, and maybe Aaron Gray and Buck Rogers, maybe with a little Carrie Fisher in Return of the Jedi, just taught me what I was interested in this life. But as far as Jessica Lange, I think her performance is great. It's often misunderstood. She did what the script said. She conveyed it. You feel like she's upset, at the end when Kong's getting destroyed up there, and you feel at the end of the movie she's really regretful and remorseful of what's happened to him and his fate there because of their meeting. But just such a great film, and I hope everybody's enjoyed listening. And I thank Adam for coming on. This has been great. What a great first episode, and I hope you'll come back, and I hope you had a good time.
Yes, I enjoyed being on myself, and I appreciate everybody that listened. And like I said, you can find I do a monthly Blu-ray report over at Movie Geeks United, as I mentioned earlier, and do the occasional reunion show where I talk. We go back and or anniversary show, I should say, where we go back and look at films from the past, either with somebody who's knowledgeable about the history of the film, and sometimes with cast members of the film. I reunited the cast from the summer of '42 last year and did a 50th with them. You can find that on YouTube. So there's that's what I'm doing when I'm not here, if anybody's interested. So.
And of course, King Kong is available right now before Scream Factory takes it off the market. Go out and get it. You got to have it in your home video collection. It's an essential, just like any other classic 70s movie, Star Wars, Jaws. King Kong should be up there because, again, although it's a misunderstood classic, it's a classic. It's an epic film on David Lean type proportions. This movie is epic. Pick it up. Enjoy it. I hope you had a good time. Bye-bye.